Hey everyone, Draco Magnius here for another episode of Drakengard 2 Weapon Stories. This time we are covering the Keykeeper's set, which covers the weapon stories of all of the lieutenants and General Gizmore who guarded the keys. This weapon set starts with Hanch's spear, then goes Ulrich's axe, followed by Zangpo's axe, then Yaha's staff, then Pitch Black. But without further ado, let's get this show on the road. The Chaser in the fortress city to the west was a master of his craft. The nobles had him decorate their armor. However, he wouldn't let anyone into his shop, and went out at the night without telling a soul where he was going. In time, his wife grew suspicious, and tried to follow him, but she lost him in a cemetery near the outskirts of the city. One night, the Chaser's wife decided to wait for her husband in the cemetery. Sure enough, the Chaser arrived soon afterwards and began to dig up a freshly buried coffin. Horrified, his wife ran away without saying a word. Once she'd collected her thoughts, she decided it was high time she had a look inside her husband's shop. What she saw there were corpses, dressed in armor and matching accessories. Her husband dancing naked among them. The Chaser had brought back the dead bodies and clothed them in his richly decorated creations. Maddened by disgust and despair, she lunged at her husband, impaling herself and him on a spear held by one of the grotesque mannequins. Several days later, the couple was discovered, skewered together, and surrounded by corpses. The offending spear, notably for its exquisite chasing, eventually found its way into the hands of Hanch. A king who made offerings to the Reaper, hoping to live forever, commissioned this axe to act as an instrument of the gods. Its purpose, to sever the necks of beautiful young men and drink their blood in the Reaper's honor. It has tasted the blood of many hundreds, and the Reaper has prospered from these tributes. For the first ceremony, the king chose 2 men and ordered one to execute the other. Every subsequent month, he would then choose a new executioner to sacrifice the last, and so it continued, year after year, executioner becoming sacrifice, until the month of the king's 115th birthday. The pair involved in the ceremony this month were best friends. When one had to sacrifice the other, he turned to the king crying and said, "I give my own life to the Reaper. I shall walk the road to Hades with my friends." Then he cut off his own head, and the axe pierced the altar so deeply that none could remove it. The king's long life was at an end. The axe finally found its way into the hands of Ulrich, where it once more provides sacrifices to the Reaper. The cycle of blood which curses it cannot be halted, a secret known only by the Reaper himself. In a small village, a man lived with his pet mouse in a shack. He was a kindly soul, but the other villagers mistrusted him because his face had been disfigured since birth. In spite of their prejudice, he harbored no bitterness toward them, smiling even when children threw stones at him. Secretly, the villagers schemed to drive their unsightly neighbor away, so they claimed that his mouse had damaged their crops and captured it one day. While he wandered the forest searching for his little companion, they cut off its head and laid its body on his doorstep. When the poor man returned to his shack, he saw that his only friend in the world had been murdered. With a howl of despairing rage, he took his axe and decapitated each of the villagers in turn, piling their heads in the center of the common. To add another to the pile, he then cut off his own, and the axe tumbled from his lifeless grasp. When it was finally retrieved from its grisly resting place, the axe's blade had been dyed red by the villagers' blood. Lieutenant Zangpo, whose pact had cost him the pleasure of eating, may have tried to replace his lost sensation with the joy of butchering foes with this axe. A bureaucrat was accused of treachery and executed by his distrustful king. His family followed his fate. But the executioner took pity upon his youngest son. He let the boy go and told the king that the job was done. The bureaucrat's son grew up to be a beautiful young man. He made his living as a thief, stealing goods from the bazaar. Sometimes he would be caught and beaten, but the pain was nothing to him compared to the joy revenge would bring. In time, he used the money he'd saved to bribe his way into a job at the king's castle. The boy's androgynous beauty caught the king's eye right away, and soon enough, he became one of the king's special companions. Late one night, he decided that the time had finally come to exact vengeance. So he headed to the king's bedchamber, armed with his father's staff, an elegant weapon tipped with a deadly blade. However, the king became suspicious when he saw the beads of sweat on the boy's brow, and called for his guards. As they converged on him, the boy cut his own throat, to the tune of the king's victorious laughter. Perhaps it was fate that Lieutenant Yaha, whose own beauty had shaped his twisted destiny, would eventually own this staff. There once lived a man to whom killing was as essential to life as breathing. There was no special reason why he murdered. He was not driven by bloodlust. It was only that murder was all he knew. One day he encountered a group of thugs who had surrounded a helpless girl. As usual, he murdered every last one of them without hesitation. When he turned to kill the girl, he found her thanking him with tears in her eyes. It was the first time that anyone had ever thanked him for what he had done. As he looked at her, he finally realized that his actions had meaning and purpose. Smiling with happiness in his heart, he brought his sword down on the young girl's head, with kindness in his eyes. He paused for a moment to watch the pool of blood expanding around her crumpled form, before leaving the scene, feeling greatly fulfilled. All of the stories of this weapon set are beyond brutal. It's fitting, and I love in this one how he's happy with killing her. Like, she was thanking him for murdering all of them and then murdering her.